In a previous video, we discussed how the pre-flood lifespans had correlations to astronomical cycles, particularly synodic periods of the planets. For example, Lamech's number of years, 777, is equal to the 777 days of the combined synodic periods of Jupiter and Saturn. And I concluded that perhaps that was a deliberate literary device used to parallel the people of God with the heavenly host, like a foreshadowing of theosis, Daniel 12:3, those kinds of ideas. In a different video on the theology behind biblical genealogies, we discussed the use of divine numbers and how they occasionally structure texts. The numeric value of Yahweh, the divine name, is 26 or 17, depending on the method of gematria. Those same numbers, 17 and 26, are also the numeric value of the Hebrew term kavod, often translated as glory. So as an example, in the genealogy of Exodus 6, Jochebed, the mother of Moses and Aaron, is the 26th name, and her name means Yahweh is glory. In the same genealogy of Exodus 6, we had 43 male names, 43 being 17 plus 26. And Moses' placement in that genealogy was related to both divine numbers. He was the 26th male name, but if you count from the end of the list backwards, starting from Phineas, you count 17 names and you arrive at Moses. But you can refer to those videos if you want to go into more depth. Today, the short article I'm looking at is from Richard Hess, and it reminds me of those discussions in a way. This is a 1991 article, and the title of it is Lamech and the Genealogies of Genesis. And he's going to begin here by observing how Lamech, in both of the genealogies of Cain and Seth, Lamech serves as this transitional, pivotal figure. And now I can upload this article to Ko-Fi if you want to look at the entire article. It's very short, though, so I'm just going to mostly look at the portions I've highlighted for us. And so Hess writes, in the genealogy of Cain, Lamech appears sixth in the sequence. Lamech occurs at the midpoint of an enumeration of 12 different names. And he goes on to point out how you have a linear genealogy prior to Lamech, and then after that, you have a segmented genealogy. And continuing on, he says, Lamech serves as the single genealogical link between the earlier genealogy of verse 17 and that of Lamech's generation in verses 18 through 24. He alone is mentioned in both. And then he moves on to discuss Lamech's song. And he writes, from the perspective of the poetic parallelism, Lamech is a new Cain. He brings Cain's line to an end and begins his own. Further down, he says, the references to Cain in the names of the offspring and in the poem form a literary inclusio, mentioning at the end of the genealogical account the same name which began it. Moving down, Hess writes, again, the line of Cain has come to an end with Lamech and his generation. The numbers 7 and 77 conclude Lamech's song. They suggest Lamech's own status as seventh in the line from Adam. The number 7 may convey the idea of completion. In moving down, the association of the number 7 with Lamech implies that the line of Cain comes to an end with this figure. The other name bearers of his generation began their own families, though of cultural rather than a genealogical sort. And then the other Lamech in Seth's line, he writes, in Genesis 5, the line of Seth ends with Lamech and Noah. Again, Lamech is unique in this line as the one figure who speaks in verse 29. And then he continues, Lamech completes the line of Seth, and also that Lamech is this transitional figure. And he argues this based off of 2 points. So first, Lamech's position in Genesis 5 is seventh in the line from the new Adam, Enosh, whose name suggests a new beginning to the line. Lamech's lifespan is 777 years. Here, as in the Song of Cain in Genesis 4, the number 7 signifies completion. The line of Seth ends with Lamech. And then second, he's pointing out naming and the wordplay associated with that. And he says, in all of these cases, the name giver designates the first of a new line. In the case of Eve, or the naming of Eve, It involves the first named figure of the line of the entire human race. As with the number of years and position in the line, Lamech's act of name giving implies the end of one line and the beginning of a new line. Thus, the Lamech of Seth's line also plays a transitional literary role, bringing Seth's genealogy to an end and introducing the new figures in their line. And now to the issue that I wanted to look at, and it has to do with the etymology of the name Lamech. And so he says the triradical nature of the name LMK suggests a Semitic etymology. However, no such root is known in the West Semitic. The Arabic YLMK, strongman, has found support in the etymological search. Outside of the Semitic language family, the Sumerian Lomga serves as the title of the deity Ea as patron of music. This has had special interest because of Jubal, son of Lamech and father of those who play the lyre and pipe. We also find compared the obscure Akkadian Lamaku, the title of a priest of lower rank which appears in lexical texts. A problem with these suggestions is the lack of attestations of other names with such roots. As neither the etymology of Lamech nor possible parallels have received certain identification, all such comparisons remain tentative. Further evidence remains lacking for the LMK root in Amorite and West Semitic. Point being, it's pure speculation. Nobody really knows. Some of these are attractive, like the idea here of the patron music idea, but nothing has really won the day. But Hess is going to offer an interesting suggestion here. He says, while the origin of the name Lamech remains uncertain in ancient Near Eastern onomastics, that is, naming conventions, the transitional role played by the name in both genealogies may suggest a direction for investigation. So again, remember, he's this transitional figure, usually relating to the number 7, things like that. Lamech encompasses the 3 middle consonants of the Hebrew alphabet. Could it be that as these letters join the first half of the alphabet with the second half, so Lamech joins 2 halves of the genealogies in the line of Cain, just as he also joins the lines of Seth and those genealogies which follow in Genesis 10 and 11. The discovery and study of abecedaries found throughout West Semitic world of the 2nd and 1st millennia BC provides an interesting perspective on this hypothesis. And so another scholar here that is interacting with Coogan has done some study on this, and specifically there were 2 Hebrew and 1 Ugaritic that he cites. And what he notes here is that all 3 began the second half of their alphabet on the second line with L restored in the case of the Ugaritic text, followed by M. In the 1 Hebrew example recording all the letters of the alphabet, the first half of the alphabet ends with K. So the point is, the abeceders, it's a tool that you use to teach, to train, and they would often put them in 2 columns. The point here is that in these examples, this is where the transition happens from the first half to the second half of the alphabet. It's happening on these letters, LMK. But to that point of the pedagogical idea in this footnote 12, this is kind of funny because Coogan notes that in one, the other ends in tet with no K anywhere in the inscription. As Coogan observes, it is probably a mistaken omission in a student's exercise. So what they have there is basically a student's workbook, and they made a mistake in it. But Hess continues, this evidence demonstrates consciousness of the central place of these letters in West Semitic alphabets of the biblical world. A reader who had learned the alphabet using similar abecedaries would naturally associate the name Lamech with a transitional movement from the first to the second half of the text, similar to the change in the alphabet at these letters. And he continues, although not in the same position in the 2 genealogies, the name Lamech serves a transitional role in both. Although possessing a different character in the 2 lines, the figure of Lamech plays a similar role in the words he speaks, bringing to an end one line and introducing the subsequent line. This similarity in function helps to explain the function of an identically spelled name in both genealogies, something found elsewhere in Genesis 1 through 11 only in the case of Enoch. I thought it was of note, though, that this particular scholar here, Rade, has suggested that Lamech is a palindrome for Hebrew king, so that this would be MLK. Thus, Lamech is king in reverse or non king. And I had actually read this before, or this kind of idea of the middle consonants having the letters for the Hebrew word for king. I'd read that in like a Kabbalah book. I put zero stock in the Kabbalah, but they do often point stuff like this out that's kind of interesting, even if it is rarely legitimate. But what he's going to point out here, however, this is not a true palindrome, unlike Rade's other examples. The palindrome of LMK is KLM, not MLK. Furthermore, while a mocking name for the Lamech of Genesis 4 may be appropriate, it is not appropriate for the Lamech of Seth's line. It seems preferable to see in Lamech a sequence of consonants deliberately chosen to avoid association with any Hebrew root. But I thought that was interesting. I've never seen that suggestion before, but it would be another one of these literary devices early in Genesis, in this case, using the Hebrew alphabet to do something kind of interesting.